سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وقل ربي زدني علما. اللهم افتح علينا فتوح العارفين ووفقنا توفيق الصالحين. وصلي اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. الحمد لله. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, we're going to continue on in the 4th chapter, but before I do that, somebody sent me an email or a text earlier asking me about, I guess some people said that I was talking in the book club about a ma'noom min ad-din daruratan, and mentioned something about, people, there's a lot of Muslims now that are more identitarians. Just because you have a Muslim name doesn't necessarily mean you're actually a Muslim. Like a Muslim is somebody who believes in Allah, His Messenger, and what the Prophet ﷺ came with. And if you reject anything, what's known as ma'noom min ad-din daruratan. Darura here means badihatan. In other words, it's something that everybody should know. Now, that doesn't really apply to people living in the West, Muslims, because the understanding that the ulama had for that was people who grew up around Islam and grew up around Muslims. And there are certain things that every Muslim knows because they grow up in a Muslim environment. So there could be people now, Muslims, that have Muslim names, or they come from Muslim families. When I lived in Southern California, there was an area where these Bengali farmers came in the 1920s, I think, and there were all these Mexican Americans with names like Lydia Muhammad and Fatima Abid, and they were children of these immigrants or grandchildren, but they were Christians, they were Catholics. So they had lost, I don't know if their parents had been Muslim or not. So we kind of assume if somebody's from a Muslim country that they're Muslim, but there are now a lot of people, even living in Muslim lands, that don't really believe in Islam. There are many secular Muslims in all the Muslim countries now. I think the majority of Muslims that live in Muslim countries still do believe in Islam, but there's a lot of confusion. We're living in a time of confusion, and it's very important for people just to not be so trigger happy. There's this kind of desire just to kick people out of Islam very quickly. And people should be careful, because the Prophet ﷺ said that, or was reported to have said that, "Man kaffara muslim faba'a ahaduhuma bil kufri." Whoever says somebody's a Muslim is not a Muslim, one of them is not a Muslim. In other words, because of your making takfir of a Muslim, that can take you out of Islam. And so it's really important. And then in the Siyar A'lam al-Nubala, which is an extraordinary biographical dictionary of scholars up to Imam al-Dhahabi's time, who was a student of Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahumullah. But he in his chapter on Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, he mentions that Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari said in his latter days, "La nukaffiru ahadan yastaqbilu qiblatana wa ya'kulu dhabihatana." إنما هي ألفاظ نختلف في تأويلها أو كما قال, something like that, but that's pretty close. That we don't make takfir of anybody who faces our qibla and eats our dhabiha. These are just semantical points that we're differing on. In other words, a lot of the disagreements about Muslims end up being disagreement over what words mean. And so Imam al-Dhahabi, ta'liqan ala hadha al-kalam, adding to what he said there, he says, وَكَذَلِكَ كَانَ شَيْخُنَا إِبْنُ تَيْمِيَّةَ فِي آخِرِ حَيَاتِهِ. And that was the way our sheikh was at the end of his life. كَانَ يَقُولُ لَا نُكَفِّرُ مَنْ يُوَاظِبُ عَلَى الْوُضُوءِ أو يحافظ على الوضوء. We don't make takfir anybody who's consistent in his wudu, because the Prophet ﷺ said only a believer is consistent in his wudu. So it's not the role of people. Takfir is, excommunication is a process, a judicial process in the traditional books of fiqh, and but this idea of just making takfir of people, is very dangerous. And so to use a clip of mine to indicate somehow that I was meaning somebody who was in Scotland. There's a man apparently has the same name as I do. I think he spells it slightly different from me. So I got all these congratulations when he won the first Minister of Scotland. But I think people should be very careful. In our deen, one of the creeds that some of you study here, woman li ma'luman ومن لمعلوم ضرورة جحد من ديننا يقتر كفرا ليس حد ومثل هذا من نفى لمجمعي أو استباحة كالزنا فلتسمعي. That's Imam al-Laqani, been taught for 400 years in Al-Azhar. He says whoever rejects what's ma'loom ضرورة بديهة, so if you reject something known by everybody, by all Muslims, like you say prayer is not an obligation or something like that. So he's saying that is kufr. It's kufr. And so the hukm of ridda goes under that person of apostasy. And then he says, or something like that if somebody negates mujma'ali, like something that's mujma'ali. There's no khilaf about it. So if there was a khilaf, then you have to be very careful. Now, there are many traditions in our tradition. وفي المعاريض لممدوحة عن الكذب. This is something the fuqaha talk about, the idea of ta'reed. Like, when you say something, you can be sarih, which is there's no ambiguity. It's unequivocal, and you're just very clear on what you say. Or the Arabs were very, very good at saying things and meaning something else. Or saying things in a way that the person hearing it thinks something, but you actually intend something else. So if somebody, for instance, asked a politician, do you think, same-sex marriage is a sin? And that politician says, no, I don't think it is. Well, you would have to ask, if he's a Muslim, you would have to ask him, did you mean for Muslims or for non-Muslims? Because there's an opinion, and this is called al-mukhatabun bil-furu', and this is mentioned again in the books of usul. Al-mukhatabun bil-furu', are people outside of Islam, are they responsible for the details of the Sharia or only for the usul of the Sharia? So the majority considered them to be responsible for the whole Sharia, the awamir and the nawahi. But there are many scholars, and some of them, the majority, like for instance, many of the Hanafi scholars, some of the really strong Maliki, it's a strong opinion, it's not the dominant opinion, but it is a strong opinion in the Maliki madhab, that they're not responsible, muttaqan. In other words, for the awamir and nawahi. Some say they're responsible for the prohibitions, but not for the commandments. And their proof is that if a non-Muslim prays, he doesn't get the reward of the prayer. If he fasts, like if a non-Muslim fasts Ramadan, they might get some benefits from the intermittent fasting, health benefits, but they don't, it's not rewarded according to our tradition. They're not rewarded for fasting because they didn't. The ones that say that they're responsible, مَا سَرَكُكُمْ فِي سَقَرٍ قَالُوا لَمْ نَكُنْ مِنَ الْمُصَلِّينَ وَلَمْ نَكُنْ نُطْعِمُ الْمِسْكِينَ وَكُنَّا نَخُوضُ مَعَ الْخَائِضِينَ وَكُنَّا نُكَذِّبُ بِيَوْمِ الدِّينِ. So they say, what brought you into hell? And they say, we didn't pray, we didn't pay zakat, and we used to just speak things just inappropriately, and then we rejected the Yawm ad-Din. So that's the proof that they use for being responsible. So this is a khilaf, and it's a valid khilaf. So there is a hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Dunya sijin al-mu'min wa jannatul kafir." The dunya is a prison for the mu'min because he is held to account for the furu' of Sharia. So he can't do things, he might even want to do them. Some people might want to drink, but they don't drink because the Sharia says you can't drink. But for the person who's outside of the faith of Islam, this is their paradise according to that tradition. And so that's the idea that they're not really responsible for the furu', they're only responsible for the usul, meaning La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. Once they accept that, then the furu', the branches of the Sharia become obligatory. So these are distinctions, they're important distinctions, But, my advice to the Muslims is to just be very careful about takfir. It's not an easy thing. And then you can also end up being responsible if a Muslim does something crazy and thinks they're doing some kind of good deed, then you could be responsible. You could have, la qadar Allah, you could have blood on your hands for doing that. It's very dangerous to do these things. I mean, we're not qudat. They say a du'at, la qudat. People that are calling to Islam, they're not judges. We're not judges. To be a judge, those are the people that would have to deal with something like takfir. But one should be very careful about making takfir. And people have made takfir of me, and I just, subhanAllah. I mean, I know I'm a Muslim. Seriously. Although he's a perennialist. I'm not a perennialist. I've never anywhere, nobody can find anywhere where I've ever said I'm a perennialist. أشققت عن قلبه. I appreciate some of the extraordinary work that people from that group of people have done, because they have done some extraordinary work. So I'm not one to just dismiss good work that's done, but I'm not a perennialist. My belief is that Islam is the final revelation, and it abrogated preceding revelations. That's my belief, and I've always held that belief since I became Muslim. So people say things all the time, and we'll meet on Yawm al-Qiyamah, and good luck. Good luck. We'll meet on Yawm al-Qiyamah, and there's a qantara. There's a place where Muslims are going to have to deal with the things that they did. Because people aren't going to get into Jannah. If you've wronged Muslims, I mean, even the goat has its day. The goat with the broken horn will have his day on the day of judgment for being butted by goats that had 2 horns. The one with the broken horns. He'll have his day. Every goat has his day. So I just think it's really important for Muslims to just be very careful. ولا يكون آمنا أو زاجرا إلا ذي في العلم قد تمهر أو قد تبحر وعلم الخلاف والإجماع واتسع اطلاع واتساع. One of the Mauritanians, he said, you can't do amr bil ma'ruf and nahy an munkar until you get deep knowledge, because there's so much khilaf in our community. There's a lot of difference of opinion. So you could see something and think it's a munkar, but it's not a munkar. They're following a valid opinion. And they said about Imam al-Ma'ziri that his knowledge was so vast that he rarely condemned anybody, because he would say, oh, maybe he's on the opinion of so-and-so. And it's very interesting. But there's so many people that just, these have tongue will travel. These people that want to go and make takfir of people. And just, first of all, we're in the West. I think people should just leave people alone. Just do what you're doing. You can say, this is not an Islamic belief. We don't believe this. If somebody says something, you can say, this is not an Islamic belief, and make that clear. But I think people should be very careful with their deen. Don't throw your deen away for some YouTube likes. One of the things Imam al-Ghazali says is that the ulama as-su, and he's talking about ulama, he's not even talking about, young boys on the internet trying to get hits, clickbait. He's not talking about those. He's talking about the ulama as-su. These were actual scholars, but they were bad scholars. And he said their hallmark is that they know that the best way to get followers is to condemn and criticize others. That's in the you can look it up. It's in the introduction to the Kitab al-Ilm that I did. It's the whole passage that he says. It's a really important point. So he says they know. And that's why if you look, a lot of these people on YouTube, they'll have on their regular, they'll have like 200 views, 1,000 views. But then when they attack somebody who's famous, they call it punching up. Suddenly it's got 10,000 views or 15,000 views. So they know this is a quick way to get people to go to your channel, because fitna's great. Everybody loves fitna, right? Everybody loves fitna. You see Muslims never doing anything, but then when the fitna comes, oh, they're so active. It's like, because shaitan's prodding them. That's all it is. He's got his prodder out, and he's exciting them. So that's my advice, is just I mean, I don't know that person. I've never spoken to them. I don't know what their beliefs are. I don't know, and I have no reason to doubt somebody's Islam. And then if somebody does say something, like, I mean, we're very clear on that. Homosexuality in our tradition is very clearly considered a sin. It's a sin. But is it a sin for people outside of the faith? That's the debate. There is a difference of opinion. So what did somebody intend? I don't know. But just to jump at takfir, I think people should be very careful. Anyway, that's just some advice. Take it or leave it. But good luck on the Day of Judgment. That's all I can say. Is that the Prophet ﷺ said, a man will speak a word and not give any consideration to it, and it will drag him in the hellfire. That word, لا يلقي لها بالا. He just won't give it. He'll just say it. It's like it's no big deal. No, you should be very, very wary about what you say.